Hello and welcome to the Expedition Eve Director's Commentary, which sounds like an incredibly pompous thing to say about my machinima made in Kerbal Space Program, but I thought it would be quite cool to do, and a lot of people on Twitter, well, 4 people on Twitter, said that it would be quite interesting to see a kind of behind the scenes sort of insight into how this series was made and all of that. So I thought I'd just do the easy thing and just show the whole thing in its entirety with me just talking about it. So obviously if you want to watch the actual film, if you're watching this on YouTube, then there is a link in the description. If you're not watching this on YouTube, then I guess you don't really need to do anything because you'll know where the full version is. Anyway, there's the title card, Expedition Eve. All these shots here, obviously I've got the kind of not ultra wide, but you know, the big cinematic black bars on either side to make it look proper cinematic-y, and all obviously these were only temporary just to create a good first impression for people who hadn't seen the episodes before, and then as you can see right here, they gradually and seamlessly fade away, and that was kind of in synchrony with them saying overriding autonomous navigation, so full control is assumed, and the whole thing goes nice and big. Those opening shots, by the way, were filmed using a drone kind of thing. I basically got a glider and just flew it around Eve and kind of angled the camera so you couldn't quite see the jet, and then, well, not jet because this is Eve, but you know, the glider, and just sort of filmed all these shots here. Now the sound this rover the rover was picking up here, this is actually a combination of me whistling into the microphone and the sound the scanner makes in Batman Arkham Asylum. That's what that sound effect was. It was originally going to be, I can just play it. It was originally going to be this sound, but I thought it didn't sound that great. So here we are driving up to the transmission tower. This is the only ship I think on Eve that wasn't actually put there properly. I just sort of hacked this onto the surface just to get this opening episode. What I really liked about Junior Attacks, and what I aimed to do with Junior Attacks, and what I aim to do with Expedition Eve, is that each episode works as a standalone video. I always try and make my videos instantly get to the action, because I understand that YouTube ADHD is a real and serious condition. And so I kind of wanted this to have a more story-focused theme than Junior Attacks did. Junior Attacks was essentially just a series of missions with things happening in the background, whereas Expedition Eve is very much a story-based plot with just missions going on in the background. And some of the missions in this series are quite good and impressive, especially the 2 Eve return rockets. But I wanted the story to take a good hold. But I also wanted to maintain my philosophy of having videos instantly cut to the action and things, and I think from a storytelling point of view that would be quite difficult to do. So that was the whole point of episode 1. Although nothing really happens, it sets up the story, so here we can just cut straight to the action, and I've put that little crawling text there just to fill in anyone that hadn't seen the previous episode. So that's another thing. I wanted, if someone just watched the episode just at face value without having seen anything else, the episode would make sense and it would work on its own. So for this full cut of the Expedition Eve series, where all the episodes are together, I actually changed a lot of the Kerbal subtitles and some of the clips because, see the live local time, by the way, actually changed just there. And this is something that made me cringe, actually. The text didn't quite fade out properly in the ticker tape, so I had to re-render that bit, but I didn't fix it for this one because the re-rendering takes 14 hours, and as of right now, I haven't commenced that yet. So I wanted to get this recording done because I wanted this all to be coming out around the same time. So this is the second rocket, and it's kind of unique in that it has those 4 big boosters, but they're all connected using the aeroplane wings to kind of create a sense that it's one ultra-wide set of boosters. So that was kind of cool, I suppose. And coming up now is the destruction of Engine 3B. There we go. A lot of people ask me if I planned that. I didn't actually plan that. I think it was to do with the fairings, and also there's a probe core and SAS unit clipped into the booster stage, so when it detaches it can deorbit itself. I think something to do with that clipping and things like that caused some collision bug, and it just caused the thing to randomly explode. So, but I thought I'd just leave it in because it kind of looked cool how the ship was flying by on the Doppler camera, and actually that was it. And also I really couldn't be bothered to reshoot the launch sequence, so you know, this is it. I thought it kind of added a little bit of Kerbalness to the thing that these missions won't always go perfectly, but yeah, we are just attaching here. You'll notice kind of a shift in tone from the earlier episodes to the later ones, actually. I think after about episode 5, so episode 6 and onwards are a lot more, less cinematic-y, if that's a word, than these ones here. So you can see there's a lot of chase cams, flyby cameras, things like that, big, slow, sweeping shots like this one here. But in the later episodes, time warp is used a lot more, and things are generally a lot more snappy. And that's just because not only are some of the missions a bit more... well, not that this mission isn't hard, but this mission is certainly quite easily replicated by a lot of people, whereas maybe the Eve Ocean Returner and the Eve Land Returner, they're both much harder to recreate. So I kind of wanted to show more about the actual ins and outs of the mission itself, rather than necessarily going on the whole 100% cinematic route. So I kind of made a compromise there, which is why these ones here, like I liked these. I don't know why I stopped doing these, because I like these shots a lot, where the camera, I've kind of done the chase cam, where it looks like the camera is sort of a physical thing attached to the side of the ship. And there goes the detachment of the top heat shield. Again, a few people get confused as to why my Eve landers all have 2 heat shields, one for the top, one for the bottom, and that's just because it makes it much easier to control the descent. It's not appeared yet, but if you've seen episode 6 prior to watching this commentary, which I guess you should have, and that's why you've already seen the whole of Expedition Eve. If you haven't, obviously I highly encourage you to watch that first, but I'm getting sidetracked. In episode 6, that was the one where it's the Eve Ocean Lander, and you may remember the rocket actually flipped and it started pointing the wrong way whilst entering the Eve's atmosphere. That was completely unplanned, and in the rehearsals I'd done for the episode, I designed that rocket in a live stream, so I'd kind of just to confirm that it all worked. So if anyone saw that live stream, then you know that it will work without flipping. But the reason that wasn't as stable, though it had the guidance fins, it didn't have a shield at the top, so that's why in the episode 9, the final Eve lander, that one does have a heat shield at the top, so it had that big sort of scaffolding, and it was a much bigger rocket, so stability was much more of an issue. Anyway, here's the shot of us landed on Eve, and a lot of people ask me what mods I used to make Eve look like the way it looks, and it's a combination of scatterer, environmental visual enhancements. I used custom settings to get the lower cloud layer and fog, and then the kind of snowy effect and some of the fog effects you can see, that's all done in post-production. I use Sony Vegas for editing. That's all I use for editing, Sony Vegas and Photoshop. Photoshop wasn't really used in this episode, but in episode 8, for example, when Jeb uses the computer, that was kind of done frame by frame in Photoshop and just run through as like a kind of PowerPoint slideshow almost in Sony Vegas. So we are the first crewed ship here. It's interesting, the launch tower there actually bends away as the rocket launches, which was not intentional, but then I realised that would happen, so I kind of worked it in as just, yeah, that's cool, we'll keep it like that. You don't see very much of it, but you watch the launch tower there, you'll see it slowly start to fall away. Not very well timed, because it only starts falling away after the rocket is fully clear of it, but whatever. Just going back to the mods I used about scatterer and environmental visual enhancements. I'd never used any visual mods prior to making this Expedition Eve series, apart from Scatterer, which is admittedly the biggest visual mod that I think makes a difference. But just looking at these shots, some of them just looks gorgeous, doesn't it? And that's not even me blowing my own trumpet or anything. I'm just genuinely commenting about how nice the mod looks. The reason I went with so many visual mods is because I kind of wanted Eve to be... like, although it's obviously a very mysterious place anyway, without mods it's just like, it looks like a purple Kerbin. Whereas with all these mods and having the draw distance, if you like, the viewing distance, that was what I was looking for, the viewing distance is so short and things, it kind of adds this bit of air of mystery. I almost wanted Eve to kind of be a character in the plot in its own right, especially when I was planning this series. The original thing was going to be kind of like a sort of survival horror kind of aspect, like definitely some creepy elements to it, like things happening. The Darbles were going to originally have a much this is, when I say previously, I mean this was in the planning stages of me just daydreaming whilst at work and things about what the series could be about. It didn't really get much further than that, but it was going to be a lot more sort of creepy elements, kind of stuff that happens in Expedition Eve episode 8. I don't know why I had to qualify that as Expedition Eve episode 8 rather than just episode 8. I love this shot, by the way. I think it was a bit of an accidental thing. where the camera's just sort of moving in practice. And this is a kind of a trademark Indiana Jones shot right here where it shows the map screen, because I kind of wanted to avoid showing the map screen except in the augmented reality interface shots. But anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, I was talking about the way I kind of wanted Expedition Eve to have a sort of horror overtone. Oh, here's a shot of the map. So say I didn't want to include shots of the map. I didn't want to use the map screen per se. I feel like this is acceptable because it's kind of like just showing. I don't know, it's difficult to put into words. I didn't want to show the UI, I suppose. This was something I actually really like the design of the way this ship, the ship's design actually worked out. Whereas that's one of the main nuclear engines for the ship, but it can be detached and serve as a ghillie lander. Obviously, the station itself is completely immobile while this is happening because it's only got the one off-centered nuclear engine now. But you know, this thing will then redock and it fixes it. And this is a nice shot actually. This isn't actually using any mods or anything. I'm just using the stock vehicle inside viewing angle thing. I don't know if there's an actual I don't know what the actual thing is called, but yeah, this is a nice shot as well, actually showing the whole of Eve. Big lumpy potato, not all of Eve, all of Gilly. And yeah, Gilly is a really nice place to go and visit if you're new to the game or just trying to get better at interplanetary, because not only does it takes about the same delta V as it does to take to the go to the Mun. So if you've got a Mun rocket, you have a Gilly rocket by default, because it takes pretty much the same number of delta V, but it is harder to get to, so it's good practice for interplanetary missions, because obviously you've got to try and get that Eve transfer window, and then actually getting, once you're actually in an Eve orbit, it's then quite difficult to get an encounter with Gilly if you're not quite sure what you're doing. So overall it is a good way to practice getting better at the game. Obviously I say it takes the same amount of delta V to get to the Mun as it does to get to Gilly. I would advise engineering a little bit more fuel into your Gilly landers, just because it makes getting back to Cone a little bit easier, because yes, you can scrape back using, you know, low amounts of delta V, but I think it's nice to just have a bit of wiggle room so you don't have to wait for the perfect transfer window to do it. But yeah, I'd say just 3,000 kilometers of delta, 3 kilometers of delta V from low Kerbin orbit will easily be enough. I have done videos on the subject. I've done an SSTO and I've done a low tech rocket as well. And there go the heat shields. That was a genuine thing. I wasn't quite sure if this thing had enough fuel, so I just incorporated some heat shields in the hopes that, you know, well, the idea being that if I ran out of fuel, I would just work into the plot that I was always going to break. And there we are, departing here. I actually rewatched the scene, as many people in the comments pointed out the similarities. I actually rewatched the scene in Interstellar, where they land on the water planet, and I actually used a lot of the sound effects from that as well, where it can... Well, I'll point it out when it happens, but when it cuts to the interior shot, not this one, but the other one, when they're re-entering, you can hear all the instruments, all the alarms going off, and everything shuddering and shaking. Those were taken from sound. These were sound samples from Interstellar. I was about to say Interstellar Quest, but that was Scott Manley, wasn't it? Okay, I actually really like this shot, actually, where you kind of say steady, and then it braces, and then you just see the plasma slowly start lapping up the side of the rocket. Side of the space plane, side of the lander, glider. Yep, I know my I know my terminology. I'm sure you can tell this doesn't have a script, but yeah, this is kind of showing UI, which again I didn't really want to do, but I kind of wanted to show that this wasn't done using cheats. Yes, I could have turned off re-entry heating or whatever just to get the shots I needed, but I still wanted to be able to show that this thing would actually work in the stock game if you actually wanted to replicate these missions from a practical standpoint. Obviously the base we have on Eve is ludicrously overkill for an actual practical purpose. You only need the lab. You only need the lab really if you want to do this for real. The reason the surface base looks the way it is, as it will become apparent in the next episode, is I wanted to be able to show interior shots, and using the stock modules it's quite difficult to get the interior shots you want. So if I just built that big ambiguous cube at the bottom, I could just build a set into it and do that. So the actual one on Eve is a prop. It doesn't have any interior on it, but and the actual set itself is located on Kerbin, just because there's so many parts in the interior of the ship. It would have made things quite laggy and maybe a bit glitchy or buggy, or things might have not survived the landing very well. So that's why it was filmed on Eve. And that's actually I mentioned this in the Juno Attacks commentary if you ever watched that, but that's how the Expedition Eve was kind of shot on the interior shots. It was all filmed on Kerbin's runway using separate vessels. Yeah, this was mainly just the surface base and the Darble base, although that was just literally 4 walls and a chair. That's yeah. Okay, so this is deploying the Ocean Lander, and there's the danger science stuff. Appropriately written in Comic Sans there, zooming out. That's Scatterer at work there, making those beautiful looking oceans. And there we are, just running around to the entrance of the habitation thing. So there it is, you get a good little shot of the habitation station there, and we can just zoom out, and that's it. This would have been the episode of episode 3. Episode 4 is the next one. That's when you'll see it when the camera starts zooming in. But that was probably my favourite one for a long time, Expedition Eve episode 4. I think now my favourite would probably be episode 9 or I'd say episode 9, 6 or 4, probably my favourites, just because of the actual technical difficulty of Expedition Eve Part 4 is starting here. So you can see we've kind of got this nice zoom in through the cloud layer. This is the lower cloud layer, which I added myself. And then we are zooming in, we kind of did some camera trickery and cutting to make it look like we zoomed in, and that was the shot there. This would have been where the title card was, this little empty shot here. That's why there's just a blank thing there. And there's the little set, actually. I was really proud of the way that turned out. We've got our lab test tubes there, and a little kettle thing puffing away. I'm not quite sure what it is, to be honest. There's that computer screen for a later episode. And then we can go out and explore. I don't know if it needs to be said, but everything in this series is completely stock. When I say everything is stock, the final end credit Easter egg, that obviously doesn't use stock parts, but that was to illustrate. Well, I won't say anything in case you've not seen the end of credits Easter egg, and that won't be included in this commentary, so you have to go back and watch the entire film again. Or I guess you could just skip ahead to the end, but that would be cheating, wouldn't it? Okay, so this is Expedition Eve Part 4. So this is kind of an episode where technically nothing really happens. There's no launches or missions or anything, but I still really like the way it turned out from I've already said this now, but from a cinematic standpoint. And actually, this is interesting. The drills in the original, you might notice a continuity error with the drills. They're actually placed higher up the walls of the surface base than they were when I actually landed it in the previous episode. And that's because when they actually deployed, they hit the ground and raised the entire structure up off the ground. And obviously that wasn't ideal. So I had to just cheat. I had to basically fix the problem and then hack it back to where it was landed. Did that make sense? I feel like I didn't articulate that very well, but yeah, I had to. So that's kind of a fraud now, this whole series, because I ended up just having to land it again using HyperEdit to get it back to the same spot. But here are all the Kerbals doing their thing, just getting all their science and stuff like that. Those air intakes on the bottom of the Ocean Lander, by the way, are kind of meant to represent channels where the water would come in for analysis, and so they can do their pH experiments or whatnot. And then we have a nice little shot of the mission control building, the way I did those sort of panning shots of the Kerbal Space Center where the camera's moving along quite slowly. I actually got a camera, I made like a little tiny drone ship, and I turned gravity off so I could just make it fall across the screen very slowly, and then just angled the camera so it wasn't able to see the spaceship I was flying, and I'll just focus it on the various buildings to get those nice sweeping shots. So there we go. This was kind of a thing, this is one thing I didn't really like that much about the episode. I found it hard to accurately show that time was passing. couldn't really find a good way of making it do that without making it overly cheesy or whatever. I played around with having a calendar appear and things, but obviously Kerbal calendars are quite complicated. Well, not complicated, but just different from Earth calendars, so it would have been hard to recognize. And here comes the storm. This was actually, as many people pointed out, is very similar to the storm in The Martian. And that's because it is from The Martian. I have The Martian Blu-ray, so I just kind of I used Shadow Play and Fraps to record some bits of the Blu-ray and just sort of messed around with the effects. When the storm happens, where Mark Watney gets separated from everyone, I kind of used the storm, added some overlays and screened it off and overlaid it onto here. That's how I created that storm effect. So a lot of the special effects in this series and in Juno Attacks are just straight up plagiarized. So don't know why I'm really drawing too much attention to this, but I'm hoping that no executives at Paramount Pictures are watching this, so it's okay. Was it Paramount Pictures or was it Fox? I think it was Fox. It was definitely Fox. And here we are in the cave. Again, this is a stock cave. It wasn't done using the mod Curb Town or any other mod that would allow you to make custom structures. But we are not on Eve. You may notice the colours look a little bit off. Obviously the rocks are purple, but the rover itself has kind of got a strange tint to it, and that's because we are actually on Tylo. Here I can just actually take away some of the special effects, and you can see that, well, first of all, now the subtitles are completely ruined, because on the right is the unaltered footage and the left is the altered footage, obviously. And you can see everything is grey, because obviously Tylo is grey because it looks like the Mun, and that looks like Drez, and you know what the colour grey looks like, I'm sure. You can kind of see it looks a little bit more washed out as well, and that's just because Expedition Eve used a bit of colour correction. But yep, that's how the cave effect was done anyway, just using loads of different colour corrections in Sony Vegas to try and make it look like I was on Eve, not Tylo. And here we are, just the cinematic-y bit that's just designed to set up the next episode, which of course is the first of the 2 missions which don't actually take place on Eve or involve Eve in any way whatsoever. Because I wanted to try and keep the variety, or have some variety from the normal things. Here's a nice little cutaway to the next episode, episode 5. And this one actually, you might notice a small, it's probably not going to be that noticeable to be honest, because this whole thing is being re-rendered again. But there is a small drop in quality for episode 5, and you'll notice the subtitle font actually changes slightly as well. And that's because if you go back and watch all the earlier episodes of Expedition Eve, for example, episode 1 used subtitles in italics, episode 2 used kind of like slightly, there was no italics in the subtitles, and the shadows were a bit faint and it was hard to read sometimes. Episode 3 had different subtitles again. It wasn't until episode like 6, it wasn't until episode 6 that I actually decided to just stick to the same kind of subtitle for every episode. So all the episodes, for making this full movie thing, I had to go back and retype out every single subtitle in the correct font and style. Except for episode 5, and the reason is episode 5 was the only one I'd lost the raw footage for. I accidentally deleted it thinking it was for, thinking it was for my Mun SS2 video, when in fact it was for Expedition Eve, and so I couldn't fix the subtitles for this one. And that's also why this bit's all fine. I still had the raw footage for this bit, but for the actual UFO encounter, I'd lost the raw footage. So I just re-rendered the whole of episode. I just re-rendered the final parts of Expedition Eve, episode 5, and that's why the quality might look a little bit blurry if you're watching this on like a 4K TV for some reason. Even this is only a 1080p video, but you may have noticed a slight drop in quality. You probably didn't, and now I've probably just drawn attention to it, so I should have kept my mouth shut really. But it's hard to think of things to talk about. We're only 22 minutes in and I've still got to keep talking for 40 minutes. This is hard, guys, you don't understand. Maybe I should talk about something that wasn't in Expedition Eve, but it nearly was, and that's this entire mission you're watching right now was actually not what the episode 5 was going to be about. We're leaving that in so we can artificially extend the length of this commentary. Oh, here's the thumbnail shot. What else can I talk about to stall some time? No, this episode was always going to be set on the Mun because I wanted to incorporate the Mun UFO as it was going to be like an Eternalin ship, as the revelations shown in episode 8 will reveal. But it wasn't going to be this rover. It was actually going to be the 60-seat Mun SS2 video I did, which was the precursor to the 60-seat Elu SS2 video. I only modified the spaceplane very slightly for the Elu mission. But I thought at the time, one of my most popular videos is the 40-seat Mun SS2 video, and I think a lot of people liked it because it was a difficult mission to do, and the video very clearly kind of shows how things were executed. You could see the nav ball and things like that, the total delta V. So if you were trying to replicate that kind of mission, which I think a lot of people tried to do, it was quite useful to be able to see the UI and be able to see the details of the flight. And for Expedition Eve, I've been taking a very cinematic approach to this. The UI is not visible in pretty much all of the videos, apart from the couple of minutes it's there in episode 4 and episode 9. Sorry, episode 6 and episode 9. And so I didn't really feel that the 60-seat Mun SS2 video was especially appropriate for the context of Expedition Eve, not only because people would want to try and recreate the mission, which would be quite difficult by comparison because the UI is not there, so you can't really see how you're doing compared to how I was doing at the same point in your mission, but also because a lot of people claimed that I always get complaints saying my SS2s are faked using infinite fuel cheats, whatever, and I think not showing the UI would be seen as kind of an admission of guilt by some of those people that say you've hidden the UI because you used the infinite fuel cheat or whatever. So I think just to avoid those claims, I think mainly though just to help people get better at flying SS2s, I kind of decided that should probably be its own thing and have its own video, and I whipped together this little rover instead, which I think I quite like the way it turned out in the end, actually, with this sort of split design. It's not split yet, but yeah. Oh, actually, you may have noticed, if I just stop talking. There we are. You can see those sound effects there, and in fact the sound effects of the rover driving in general. That's all done using sound effects I recorded in Grand Theft Auto 5. The actual movement of the drills being deployed and things, that was the forklift truck in GTA 5, me just raising and lowering the forks and just recording that sound. Driving around the rovers, for the Eve rover and for the Mun rover, when they're driving around, it plays a little sound of a rover driving along. That was actually the golf cart in GTA 5, driving around in these, I can't remember what it's called, you know the snowy area where the first mission is. I've got it on PC, so I just cheated myself into the snowy area with a load of different cars and drove them around. I was originally going to use the dustbin lorry, or what's it called, a refuse truck in America, trash truck, something. I don't know. I don't really care. But I just thought it was a bit weird because it's very clearly a combustion engine, which wouldn't have really worked that well in space. So I went with the electric car in the end. And here we are, using the air brake as a kickstand. This isn't actually the first time I've used a rover that falls apart to reveal a rocket ship underneath it that then uses a kickstand to launch. I actually sent a rover to the Dres Canyon, which I'd actually really like to recreate that mission, actually, now I've got a good computer, because that video is only at 720p, and the actual quality of it's not that great. It's very blurry, very sort of pixelated, because my computer literally couldn't run the game very well. So I think I'd quite like to recreate that mission, but this is obviously, I wouldn't want to call it a homage to that, because I'd feel quite arrogant saying I throw homages to myself in my videos. But yeah, it was kind of a throwback to that. And yeah. I think there's not much more to say about that, really, so we're just going to enter here, and once again this thing works. We didn't really get any exploding parts, which was nice. Like all the ships in this series, they all should work if you ever wanted to use them yourself or recreate the designs or the flight plan in some way. But this is coming up to the end of Expedition Eve episode 5, and all this bit here from where the flag was planted was where the re-rendered bit happened. I don't know if you could tell, but hopefully you couldn't, but if you could, that's where it was. Anyway, here we are, just setting up the events of the next episode. Again, just going back to what I was saying earlier about me wanting to have all the videos launched straight into the action. Here we are, this is now cutting to the next video. So we just cut in straight away. We didn't need to do any kind of build up or anything like that, because I wanted all the episodes to kind of just launch straight into being their own thing. So this is the first of the kind of new direction this series took, where it was less about cinematics and more about actually showing the details of the missions. Not only because the missions are I wouldn't want to call them much harder. Well, they are much harder from now on, because this is obviously an Eve Ocean Lander, which is pretty much the final boss of Kerbal Space Program, I always likened Eve Returns to. But yes, this is the Neptune 5. It's kind of a play on Saturn 5, the Apollo moon rocket, for those of you that might not have known what the Saturn 5 was. And also Neptune, just because Neptune is the name of a planet like Saturn, and Neptune was the god of the sea. And this thing is landing in the sea, and that's why it's called Neptune 5. This does fall apart for episode 9, because the rocket in that is called Neptune 6, and that doesn't land in the sea. Although I'm pretty sure it has the capability of doing an Eve Ocean return, just like this one does, but Eve Ocean returns are much harder than Eve Land returns. If you're planning to do an Expedition Eve, if you're planning to just do an Eve return mission, I would aim for sort of higher ground, especially above 1,000 meters above sea level, because below that point, Eve's atmosphere is incredibly, ludicrously thick, and it takes a huge amount of fuel to get through that first part. The Suposphere, I think it's likened to a lot. But so yeah, that's the challenge with Eve Ocean Landers. They are much, much harder than Eve Land Landers. This is a really nice shot coming up, actually. It's actually the image I used for the thumbnail, although I changed Kerbin in the background to make it look like it was Eve. Not this shot. Maybe it's not for a while. Nope. Not quite there yet. Not quite there yet. There we are. That was the shot I used for the thumbnail. And I think that's a really nice image. You could almost use that as a wallpaper, couldn't you? Now, I don't know if you can see it too well in this shot, but you might see the Mark 1 command pod just at the bottom there. You'll definitely see it later on. And that's kind of how it feels like I'm cheating, really, when it comes to making Eve Land. You can see it there, definitely on the left. The way I can get Kerbals onto the surface in a really easy way without having to worry about landers is I just make a command pod that's accessible from the surface, and I just get Kerbals to board that, and then I just press transfer crew, and they can just transfer through. Oh, there's the classic little map shot I've started to incorporate in Expedition Eve episodes. I feel like it's kind of cheating because they are just transferring through fuel tanks, but again, it's just so cheesy. And I think a real rocket, like using the example of the Martian, I know that's not a real rocket, but they kind of they board at the bottom and there's a ladder going through the center of the ship. That's kind of how I feel like my ships would be designed if they were real. Maybe. I don't know. But that's kind of how I justify it in a really crappy way. But yeah, that's a good little tip if you actually don't really care about realism too much when you're designing EVE landers. Is just make a command pod that's accessible from the surface. And you can just transfer Kerbals from the top into that one and then out onto the surface. So you don't have to worry about ladders or making the actual main command pod accessible via a ladder. And there go the heat shields. You can see those fins at the top end there. If you are downloading this craft file and using it, make sure you toggle the pitch control and everything like that on those fins, because they're not activated by default because they are pointing the wrong way. So during the Kerbin ascent, they'll actually be sort of quite counterintuitive to your ascent. They will try and flip you over, but they didn't really help here either because I'm rubbish at this game, as it turns out. But introducing a spin there, that just distributes the heat across the vessel and makes it less likely for one part to be destroyed. And there go the fins there, nice and clear from the rockets. And there go the parachutes. What the subtitles are actually talking about right now is real. If you were to detach those heat shields earlier, the rocket would fall, but the chutes wouldn't slow it fast enough and actually begin to start accelerating again before the parachutes fully deployed, and that would cause them to get shredded apart and things. But now we're nice and thick into the atmosphere, we can detach them. The center of the drag shifts, and now it's just the parachute, so the rocket automatically flips itself the right way up. And then we can just focus in and watch it land. So luckily, this thing is, although it's obviously huge because it's an EVE lander, it's light enough to be able to land purely on parachutes. The lander in episode 9 is significantly heavier and so does need some engine assistance when it comes to touching down. But luckily, this one is fine. And I think part of that is owed to the fact that it's an ocean lander where the atmosphere gets so thick as you approach sea level. Parachutes are much more effective. If any of you have seen my Lathe surface base video, or ocean base I should say, that actually had a submarine in it where it was just a command pod that had some ore tanks and a service bay, and that could just raise and lower itself at will. And that was the plan for this one as well. That command pod our Kerbal is getting into now, that was going to originally detach and serve as a submarine, but I didn't want to add to the length of the episode anymore, so I kind of just left it as being a laser that breaks off a surface from the bottom of the ocean. And there goes the augmented reality interface. I didn't want to use it originally, but I wanted to show people that this rocket works in real life, because there is a bit of a lack of sea level ocean landers on YouTube, for EVE at least. I know there's a Brad Wistons one, there's a Hazardish one, but other than those, there are a couple of others I think probably, but there aren't that many, and I think it's always good for people to be able to see not only how different players fly ships differently, but also just to seeing lots of different designs, just for either to help you fly the same design if you download the craft file, or when you're trying to design your own lander, just seeing how other people design theirs and sort of trying to work out the best approach for yours. There go the final stage, rather explosive. I think this launch took about 2 or 3 attempts to make sure nothing exploded on the way up. And there you are with EVE. You have to take a very aggressive ascent. You want to be spending a lot of your time going vertically until you get to about just over 50,000 is when the atmosphere starts to thin out enough that you can just focus on pure horizontal acceleration. This probably wasn't the most efficient ascent here, but I knew I had loads of fuel still left in the upper stage, so it wasn't really a problem about being efficient at this point. So we are just circularizing here, and we've just got those fuel tanks at the front that we can detach when they're empty. There we are. We've still got well over 3,000, almost 3,500 Delta V left, which is more than enough to get back to Kerbin. So I really could have just stopped using the augmented reality interface at this point, or just the UI, let's call it what it is. But you know, for the sake of just showing that this thing is completely usable and possible, and anyone wanting to use this video as a tutorial can, so I just left it in. And there we have a nice little asparagus setup at the very end, but that's pretty much the end of the ocean returns. This was probably the hardest mission to pull off of all of them, except maybe episode 9's return as well. I'd say they were both equally hard, to be honest. I couldn't really say which one was which, but yeah, EVE Ocean Landers, like I say, I always likened them to being the final boss of Kerbal Space Program. The final boss would probably be the Jool 5 mission, which is obviously landing on all 5 of Jool's moons in one mission, but that's slightly more arbitrary in design. Like a simple return from EVE is a pretty basic mission to do, and that's returning an EVE surface sample is actually a thing I don't know if this makes sense. Duel 5 is kind of an arbitrary challenge that someone just decided to come up with, whereas Return from Eve is a very basic thing. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense, but we're going to roll with that. And there we are, we can just point ourselves retrograde. And enter Kerbin's atmosphere. Obviously that solar panel is not going to survive because it's not a retractable solar panel. But I was surprised at just how far we made it before it exploded. And there we are, just touching down. I always think it's kind of weird just to see our lander capsule like that, how tiny it is compared to the rest of the rocket that got it on its return journey, and just shows how ludicrous Eve rockets need to be for the smallest of payloads. And there we are, using that lab shot, doing our analysis. Again, just setting ourselves up for the next video. Yeah, I think it just speaks for itself really. This was a shot from Juno Attacks, of course, using that hologram there. That hologram effect was achieved using Scatterer's wireframe mode when I just filmed a shot of one of the Juno ships. And this was actually the post-credit scene of the Juno Attacks movie. Obviously I cut away just before it shows the big reveal, which I won't reveal if you haven't seen Juno Attacks yet, and that's still one of my most proud achievements, Juno Attacks, so I do recommend that. Now the launch tower for this rocket actually was a lot more elaborate originally, like it had big working stock hinges and fuel lines and big lights on it, but every time I launched the rocket it would just go all spaghetti and cracking it and things. I just changed all the dialogue here actually from the first one. From the standalone episode, I mean, because this was all just exposition at this point, just saying kind of the story so far, but obviously if you're watching this in movie form, you already know what the story is, so I changed all the subtitles and even some of the shots at that beginning thing, and then we can launch our rocket. This is probably the most simple rocket in the whole series of Expedition Eve, but I still really like it. I kind of like the simplicity of it and the fact it looks like a real NASA-style rocket. I mean, we've got those solid rocket boosters, but once they've detached, it looks very reminiscent of the Saturn V. So, well, yeah, that's it. And I kind of used the excuse. I just wanted to try and do a Juno mission without nuclear engines. There wasn't really any reason for it. I worked it into the story as being that the scanners on board the lander are very sensitive, and so having a nuclear engine set up would have damaged them in some way. But ultimately, I just wanted to kind of see, I kind of just wanted to do a non-nuclear Juno mission. I've just never done one before, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to show off. Not that it's a particularly hard mission, but a lot of people have this attitude that they can never go interplanetary without nuclear engines, and it absolutely is possible to do interplanetary without nuclear engines, especially for Gilly. Gilly returns don't really need a nuclear engine, and Juno missions don't really need a nuclear engine either. It does mean that your ultimate rocket is going to be bigger because you need more fuel to account for the fact your engines aren't as efficient, but it's definitely possible to do interplanetary without nuclear. But there we are, we can just board our lander and do our detachment there. The reason I put a Kerbal in the lander was just to make sure that in case everything went wrong, I'd be able to, like, because obviously the main mothership doesn't have any RCS apart from those side-mounted Werner engines. So just in case anything went wrong, I would be able to just use the more controllable RCS on the lander. It has a lot more RCS thrusters on it, so I could just maneuver it into the right position. But luckily, everything was fine, and it wasn't really needed. And there's our rocket, the Mars 5. Obviously, the name of this one stems from the fact that Juno's counterpart in the real world is Mars, and this mission is flown using what's kind of been dubbed as Apollo style, in that it has a lander and a mothership. The lander is stored below the mothership, and then everything kind of spins around and organizes it in the way you're sitting now. That was how the Apollo missions were done. The Apollo missions was a Saturn V rocket, so Saturn is a planet and Mars is a planet, so Mars 5. Does that make sense? Anyway, yeah. Here's our drogue chute here. I say drogue chute is actually a heat shield, but it just creates a little bit of drag. Juno, re-entry heating is not an issue on Juno, really. I mean, if you're coming in at ludicrously high speeds, then yeah, you may have to be a little bit conservative in your actual approach, but we're just trying to circularize here. We're not even trying to land, so we can be take a quite shallow approach to entering Juno. You can see there's not even a temperature gauge showing up here, so re-entry is not an issue. Then we can just attach our heat shield once our apoapsis is starting to reach the point where we want it, so we can just minimize our drag now, and then we just hold retrograde until we're clear of the atmosphere. And I actually managed to get it to 60 kilometers. Juno's Kármán line is 50 kilometers, so as long as you're above 50 kilometers, it doesn't matter too much. And that lander is capable of docking with ships higher than what we are now. And there's a little shot just there. You can actually get these cool shots inside vehicles by just double clicking on places, and then the camera will move around. And there's our other Kerbal sitting in orbit just to monitor them. So yeah, not a lot more to say about that, but this is kind of, again, just makes it similar to Apollo. And then we can just get ourselves clear and we can fire up the aerospike engine. There wasn't really a specific reason I used aerospike engine. I mean, it looks pretty cool, and it's a very efficient engine when it comes to atmospheric flight, so I don't use it very often, so I thought I'd just use it. And there go the parachutes, and in a minute you'll see me change versions of KSP. If we just have a look here, if you can watch the parachutes here, you'll see how they kind of all separate. This is a relatively new feature, so if you just watch this shot here, hang on, there's a sick transition coming out. If you look at the parachute, the shadow there on the left, you notice all the parachutes aren't separated anymore, and that's because we are now in version 1.05. Because at the time of making this episode, the mod Alien Space Programs, which is the mod I used to put this base on Juna, it wasn't compatible with KSP 1.2, so I kind of switched back to 1.05 for this shot here, and that's why some of the visuals look a little bit different. For example, the visual mods don't look quite as, well, they don't look the same basically, so that's why we've changed versions for this shot here. And well, not a lot more to say about that really. We can just deploy our scanners, kind of do a Ubisoft style sweeping in and then sweeping back out again. That was the wrong way around, wasn't it? Sweeping out, sweeping back in. And there we are. So we can just go on EVA. And at this point I was pretty much just improvising. I wasn't really sure where the labs would go. I kind of just moved the mouse around trying to find an interesting location, and in the end I quite liked the inside of the wrecked Kerbal vehicle assembly building. On the right you can see the War Argus Easter egg there, just spray painted on the side, kind of hinting to the fact that, you know, the blue Kerbals, they are still around. They are, you know, but obviously they're nowhere near as capable as they once were. But perhaps in the final film of this trilogy, the trilogy so far consisting of Expedition Eve and Junior Attacks, I'd quite like to do a third one just to make it a nice trilogy. I don't know what that will be about yet, but I think the blue Kerbals will definitely be making some kind of appearance in in that film. But for now, we're boarding this thing. In fact, Expedition Eve isn't even the first series I've done about Eve. The first series I did about Eve was called Fry Me to Eve. It was never officially called that, but that was the working title, and it only consists of 2 videos. It was my Eve submarine, which was the first video I ever uploaded on YouTube, actually. Well, the first Kerbal video I uploaded on YouTube, and the Eve Ocean Lander video I did. So the first Eve Ocean Lander I made, which was horrendous compared to the Expedition Eve Ocean Lander. It only worked on 80% re-entry heating, and it was just it was just a poor design. It wasn't a very well designed rocket, which is why I don't really like that video very much anymore, even though from a video making standpoint the video is quite good. I really like the way the music all worked in it and things, but I don't know, it didn't really perform that well, or as well as I'd hoped. And I think looking back, the actual design of the rocket is just a bit cringy. So we are redocking with our ship. The only tip, I've actually taken down one of my videos because I've just hated it so much. The actual design of the rocket, the execution of the mission, it was so bad. I just said I can't watch it without physically cringing, so I deleted it. And it was my original Moho mission. To make up for this, I recreated the entire mission again using not only my PC so it looked better, but actually performing it better. So the lander itself was better, the video itself overall was just better edited, and it was just a better video. So yeah, not much more to say about that really. On the way back now, and then we can enter in at Kerbin. So we can just detach that shield. You notice I used that blue decoupler there, even though really I should have used the black and yellow one, but the black and yellow one is so ugly compared to the blue one, so I always use the blue one pretty much whenever I can. Yeah, so we can just deploy our parachutes. In a similar way to Apollo, this again uses the 3 parachutes, although we don't land in the ocean. So it's not quite fully Apollo style. Also, we didn't land on the moon, which I guess is another thing that makes us not very Apollo style. You can see I'm rambling here because there's not much more to say about this particular part of Expedition Eve. So hopefully it's wrapping up soon. And if you saw the subtitle just there, good stuff Tim, sending a crew to recover you now. I actually thought about filming that, so sending a little truck over there to grab the pods there. I've used this same shot how many times now? I think this is like the 4th time I've used this shot of the labs, but it's a good shot, alright? This same shot as well, actually, I've used quite a few times, this thing with the ladder deploying. Because I'm an incredibly lazy individual, and if I can reuse footage, I will reuse footage. So, yeah, so this was the accidental jump scare coming up, just warning you of that now. Oh, there we go, speaks for itself, and then we can just cut to a kind of like, this is kind of a dream sequence inspired by the Michael's drug trip in GTA 5, where he kind of trips out and he has this hallucination of him falling from the sky over a very surreal view of the city, and that's kind of the same effect I was going for here. Obviously Eve is nowhere near as visually interesting as Los Angeles, but I feel like it's kind of trippy enough. And this was actually, aside from rendering the actual film itself, you know, the hour-long video, this was the most heavy thing for my computer to process. I think it took about 4 hours just to render this one shot of Jeb falling because of the visual effects and things employed. And you can see the kind of shadow slowly creeping up around the edge of the screens. This was definitely the most render-intensive video, but 4 hours is insane. I mean, my computer's pretty good. It's got 6 Core i7, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it's all overclocked and things. And it's obviously got a 980 Ti to do GPU acceleration as well, and it still took 4 hours to render that. So I don't know if that really speaks. There you can see a little shot there I edited in the background. You can see the mouth of the cave. Obviously this is on Tylo, not Eve, so I kind of created a little mask there and showed a shot of Eve's atmosphere to create the illusion that we are definitely on Eve, guys. Speaking of editing, this is probably the most edit-heavy episode, to be honest. Not only because of the drug trip sequence or hallucination sequence, like I should call it, but also everything else. This bit here where Jeb is using his computer, this was kind of done in Photoshop, the actual interface he's looking at, and then I added a sort of TV effect using Sony Vegas. Kind of looks like a CRT on the interior view, so I added the little classic CRT screen flicker effect that CRTs have. I wouldn't really call it an effect, that it's like more of a compromise of CRTs. Anyway, what was I talking about? Here we are coming up to the base, and this was the big revelation that everything has changed. Originally it was going to be that Jeb was going to be so-called out of time. He'd just been shifted out of his reality into a reality where Kerbin is just completely decimated. But it was hard to write that into I only had a limited amount of text I could show on each subtitle, so in the end I just simplified the story a little bit and just saying that his reality got changed. But yeah, here we are, another little shot of the interior of this thing. I wished I'd been able to use the balcony a little bit more actually, because I really like the instrumentation benches on the top of the balcony, but whatever, kind of everything. And this is a little, I wouldn't really call it a homage as much as it is a plagiarism of the computer they used in The Incredibles. All the pictures of the Kerbals here, though, these are all taken from actual videos of mine. So the Jebediah Kerbin one, I think, was from a Juno mission. There's a shot from the Soviet Mun mission I did. I think Val's picture was taken from the Mun base video. Whatever. And there's obviously Kerbin, a icy wreck, using very convenient bullet points there, which tells Jeb everything he needs to know. And then we says finding me. And those coordinates are actually quite significant. They mean something. I'm not sure what they are. Maybe it was where my base was landed, but I just remember using HyperEdit to just get a set of coordinates from something. I just pasted it into Sony Vegas. But I'm pretty sure those are the coordinates of the actual surface base on Eve. But who knows? I can't really remember where I got them from now. So I don't even... That was a complete non-point to mention, wasn't it? Anyway, here Jeb goes, getting into his rover. I love that little shot there, actually, the rover and the surface base in the background. I used that in the back of the Blu-ray cover for Expedition Eve, because obviously this is good enough to be circulated on Blu-ray, I'm sure. Okay, so what are we doing now? So we're coming up to the second hallucination scene, I want to call it. It's not quite as graphically intensive as the previous one, but here's Jeb just running around finding another UFO drawing here, although this one actually looked more like a hat. But yeah, we got that sick, sweet visual effects, and here's Jeb hallucinating over Eve when it was long ago. This isn't actually Eve though, this is the mod Asclepius. I think it's Asclepius or Asclepius. It's a planet mod for version 1.05. I don't think it's compatible with any other version. If you saw my April Fool's video, in between Kerbin and Juno, I noted that there was another planet orbiting. That's this planet here. And it's kind of designed for flying space planes and things. It's got atmosphere that jets can use, but everything's quite low gravity and things, so it's quite cool. And these are the Darbles. I accidentally forgot to remove the Expedition Eve logo from their jetpacks, so whoops. And this is kind of the story I wanted to discuss, why the blue Kerbals look so similar to green Kerbals. It's because they're both descended from the same race, and that's the Darbles. That's kind of also how I justified Star Trek aliens and Doctor Who aliens all just looking like humans, because they all descended from a race. I was going to say a master race. That's probably not the best terminology to use. I was taken from one of the Kerbal trailers, by the way. The Birth of the Kraken trailer. What was I talking about? Yeah, they all just descended from the same race, so I can try and get past the fact that they're all clearly just humans in rubber costumes. And this is actually the Kerbal Space Center edited onto Eve, again in version 1.05 using the mod Alien Space Programs. That's how those shots were taken there. And then just a bit of sort of explaining why the UFO on the Mun links to the ocean and things like that. And yeah, that's all this. So this is kind of an explanation as to why Kerbals have green skin and why the Juna Kerbals have blue scales. Just the way they evolved, and totally not just an easy way for me to distinguish which one's which through visual alone. That was a modded planet I made myself, by the way, that red planet the rocket was flying next to. And not much more to say about that, but we can it's going to cut back to when the Eve lander actually landed in a second now. If we just wait for that shot to appear. I thought it was going to come sooner than this, to be honest. There we go. When this thing touches down, I actually used a sound effect I recorded in GTA 5. I basically took a plane, flew it up, and then landed on a desert environment and recorded the sound the wheels make. So if you go back and watch that part of the film, you'll actually hear the plane actually touches down. It makes a little noise as it runs along the ground, which I thought was a nice little feature that I did. And here's the interior of the base once again. Yeah, and then we can launch into episode 9, the final episode. And again, this was actually quite a challenging mission to execute. So it's one of my favourite episodes from that point of view. And this is it, the Neptune 6. And it's an Eve lander. So it's going to land on the land this time, not on the ocean. But yeah, it improves upon the Neptune 5 in a number of ways. Not only can it now carry 4 Kerbals as opposed to just the 1, but it also has a much more sophisticated guidance system when it comes to entering. First of all, it's got a top-mounted heat shield, which Neptune 5 did not, and the actual guidance fins extend a lot further out, so hopefully they have a bit more influence when it comes to controlling this thing and holding it steady. So we can just show a few shots of everything decoupling on the way up. Those engines broke, but it didn't actually affect anything on the main rocket itself, so it wasn't too big of a deal. I think there was a... this was the second attempt I had to launch this, because the first time one of the boosters hit the main fuselage and destroyed it. But this time, it worked out okay. So, not a lot more to say about this really. It's kind of cool seeing the whole rocket just sort of sitting on the top, clearly a whole rocket in its own right. And there we are, we can commence the escape and set ourselves on a course for Eve. At this point I am starting to run out of things to say after watching so many Eve returns back to back and trying to find new things to talk about on each one, so I guess I could just let the visuals do most of the talking. But here I was really just trying to cut down on the amount of time this video would take, so I condensed all of the 3 periapsis burns into a very short amount of time, not showing any of the ships circling the planet and swooping back down, just because I wanted to kind of get to the point with this video really. Because most people would be watching it for the sake of seeing an Eve lander, because YouTube is a good place to try and get inspiration for designing your own ships, and so a lot of people, I appreciated a lot of people will be watching this video to see an example of an Eve lander, and so yeah, I wanted to kind of get to the point rather than focusing too much on the story that other people might not have seen before. Okay, so then we're going to lower our periapsis. Again, this ship does absolutely work if you wanted to use this yourself. I know the UI is not visible, but it works, so if you wanted to use it, you can. This is actually an old edit of Expedition Eve, though. I forgot to show the cut of the lower heat shields detaching in this version, but in the actual film, I included that shot, so worry not. There we are, we're just attaching the upper stage in a minute, or maybe not. Hang on, there we go. You can see how people often say, oh, your PC must be so beast because you can do things like that where everything explodes and there's absolutely no lag whatsoever. Trust me, there is lag. I had to go back and edit it frame by frame to remove all the duplicated frames, so all the explosions and things would be nice and smooth. I think I touched upon this in Junior Attacks as well, but yeah. You can see, I could have detached those manually, but I thought it would look cooler to have a few more gratuitous explosions before the sacrificial landing gear absorbs most of the impact to directly read the subtitles I wrote there. I don't know if any of you might have doubted that they were meant to be sacrificial, and I just said that because I didn't realise they were going to explode. I actually did anticipate they would explode. I knew that the Vector engines are quite durable, so I just used the landing gear to absorb most of the impact. I know it's gone now, but you might have seen that shot where all the Kerbals were sitting in the rover, and a lot of people ask me how I get those shots without showing any cutaways from anything. Like, literally the only way you could see the Kerbals was looking through the windows of the rover. I do this for my space station videos as well. The way I do that is I record footage of the rover just sitting there with no IVA view enabled, and then I enable interior view and I record that, and then I kind of overlay the videos and apply a mask to only show the Kerbals of the places I want them to be shown, which in this case is through the window ports. That's how those shots are done. And there goes augmented interface mode again. This is how I film most of Expedition Eve actually. I record at 2560 by 1440p. Obviously the video is only 1080, so I can just crop out the edges of the screen, because the bits that doesn't have the UI on is about 1080p, so I just have the UI on pretty much all the time, but I crop it out for the actual videos themselves, which is why the UI scale is so tiny and why I should have probably changed the scale of it prior to recording the ascent from Eve. But the rocket was starting to get a little bit glitchy on the surface, and I didn't want to just have to restart the game to fix the UI and then come back and find the rocket had been destroyed by the Kraken. So I thought, we'll just go ahead and do it. And there we are. So again, very aggressive ascent, probably too aggressive, but it doesn't really matter too much. The explosive decoupling, or should I say explosive detachment of the side vector engines on the main stage, that was intentional. Some of the rehearsals I did for this mission, only one of the vectors got destroyed when it was detached, so I did have an action group set up to deactivate either of the side engines just in case one of them survived and the other didn't. But in the end, they both detached as intended, because once the weight of those two fuel tanks on the side had been lost and we were quite high out of the atmosphere, 3 engines was overkill. And this is the Engineer, which is an actual SSTO I made for Junior Attacks, actually. The 20-seat MUN SSTO video, that was the Engineer, and that's it there, being brought out. The old War Dog being brought out again for one last mission, so they didn't really show too much of that because I've already shown the Engineer in their video before, and it has the Delta V to do the mission it's doing in this video. So we can just kind of cut to the chase and show us returning from Eve. And don't know why the asparagus didn't work, because again, I do all these missions before I film them to make sure that nothing will go wrong, which is not always the case, obviously, but I try and make it so nothing will go wrong. And when I did this before, the asparagus stage was fine, the fuel tanks weren't missing, so I'm not quite sure what happened there. I'm assuming something maybe clipped in an editor, or just the Kraken got to me, whatever, I don't know. But the fuel line should have been there, I don't know why they weren't. And this is just re-entering. We had loads of fuel left over, so I just thought I'd bleed off some speed, even though we really didn't need to, because we have that heat shield at the front. I think I used about 50 units of Blater, but I didn't. It was fine. So yeah, and that's it. That's the end of Expedition Eve. So I hope you enjoyed the series. If you have any suggestions about what you'd want to see in the next series, the best way of contacting me is Twitter. I do read YouTube comments, but obviously I get many more YouTube comments than I do get tweets. So I will pretty much always read tweets, whereas I don't always get to see specific YouTube comments, unfortunately. So if you have any suggestions for what you want to see in the next episodes, next series I would say, or just ideas for videos in general, I'm always open to suggestions. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed this rambling, waffling mess of a director's commentary. But I guess we can just let the credits roll now. So again, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.
Tied around their throats.